Today I'm going to be talking about photosynthesis, and we're going to walk through the equation and each step in photosynthesis. So as you can see, we have the equation right here, which is 6 carbon dioxide, 6 H2O, with sunlight produces glucose and oxygen. So as you can see, the energy would come from the sun. That would be the main source of energy. The carbon dioxide just comes from the atmosphere, from what humans breathe, what humans and animals exhale, etc. And that would be absorbed through the stomata within the leaves. H2O comes from the roots, and those are absorbed through the xylem, which act as pipes, which carry the water through the plant, and they enter through the mesophyll cells. And the photosynthesis as a whole takes place in the chloroplast of a cell. So this is a chloroplast cell. Right here you have the thylakoid, which is where the light reactions take place. You have the granum, which is essentially it's just a stack of thylakoids. And you have the stroma, which is the liquid inside, similar to cytoplasm, but it's the site of the Calvin cycle. And you have the inner membrane, the outer membrane, and the lumen is the inside of the thylakoid. And as you can see, the stroma lamellae is what connects the thylakoids together. And you have the inner membrane space. So what's going to happen in the first step is the light reaction. And this takes place in the thylakoid membrane, so it's between the stroma and the thylakoid lumen, which is the inside. On the screen you'll see two boxes, it's labeled PS2 and PS1. This stands for photosystem 2 and photosystem 1, and they were labeled in that order just because that's the order they were discovered, photosystem 1 and then photosystem 2. And these are essentially just proteins that contain chlorophyll, which is the pigment that helps plants absorb energy from the sun. You also see several purple boxes and circles scattered along the membrane. So these represent the channels of electrons, and the large one in the back, this is ATP synthase, which we'll talk about later. It's very important. The first thing that's going to occur in the light reaction is it'll absorb sunlight. So the sunlight will be coming in from the outside, and this is essentially what's going to power the electrons to make it through the entire electron transport chain. The electrons that move through the electron transport chains go through until it gets to the NADP+. And then once these carrier proteins pick them up, it turns into NADPH. And this is one of the products of the light reaction. So the water molecules, those go in, and then they're split. So the electrons come out, and those go through the electron transport chain. Oxygen is released as a byproduct. And the hydrogens, those are protons, which create the concentration gradient, which will essentially power the ATP synthase. So the electrons, as they go through, they go all the way, and these give power. They pump the hydrogen protons to one side, and then once they're all on the interior side, there's only one way for them to go back, and they go through the ATP synthase. And the ATP synthase actually works as a sort of water wheel. So as the hydrogen protons go through, it generates ATP. And that's the other product of the light reaction. Next we have the Calvin cycle. And this actually takes place in the stroma. So first you'll see you have RUBP. And RUBP is a 5-carbon molecule. And as it goes through 6 carbon dioxide, this is where the carbon dioxide comes into the equation. That comes in. And then Rubisco is an enzyme which attaches the carbon dioxide and the RUBP together. And immediately it's going to break it apart into a molecule, into two 3-carbon molecules. So it goes from a 5-carbon molecule combined with a 1-carbon molecule, and that generates 2 3-carbon molecules. And as that goes through, you can see the ATP from the light reaction and the NADPH from the light reaction, also over here, ATP over here. this just works as energy to power the cycle. So the ATP goes through, and then the original molecules into um, they're broken down into three carbon molecules, and then this creates G3P, which is very important. So G3P is used to create different types of sugars. As you can see, it branches off here. So some of the G3P breaks off to create sugars such as fructose, sucrose, etc. But most of them actually are recycled back to the beginning of the Calvin cycle, and it starts over. That's why it's a cycle. It keeps going. So each cycle goes through and uses one carbon dioxide at a time. And it just keeps going and going, and that's what produces sugar, and also is what uses the energy from the light reactions. So these are the steps of photosynthesis. You have the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. You have sunlight, which is used to power the whole thing. And then in the equation, you can see the 6 carbons from the 6 carbon dioxide. You can see that up here in the glucose. Then you have the 12 oxygen from carbon dioxide and 12 oxygen from water. So there's 6 oxygen right there, 12 oxygen right there, and another 6 right there. So that amounts to 24 oxygen total. And then you have the 24 hydrogens, 12 times 2. You have 12 hydrogen there and 12 hydrogen there. So everything is balanced. And if you take the reverse of this is actually cellular respiration. That's a different story. So you have the sunlight as the main source of energy. It powers the light reaction. O2 is given off as a byproduct, and H2O is absorbed through the xylems, through the xylem of the plant. And then through the light reaction, it produces ATP and NADPH, which is the energy to start to go through the Calvin cycle. And in the Calvin cycle, NADP plus and ADP plus phosphate, these are given off as the energy in these two are already used. So it goes back to the light reaction. And from the Calvin cycle, you can get sugar, from which will fuel the plants. And then Calvin cycle is where our CO2 goes in. And then this whole process will just keep going over and over again. And that's how plants produce energy for themselves and how they produce oxygen for other living beings.